Raymond Holt checked his cufflinks one more time in the bathroom mirror of the Whitmore Grand Hotel and decided that tonight was going to be the most satisfying evening of his life. He had planned it down to the last detail, the placement card, the seating arrangement that would put her 3 tables back, behind the pillar, just far enough to see everything but close enough to feel it. He had selected the venue himself, the rooftop ballroom of the Whitmore, 60 floors above Chicago, where on a clear night you could see all the way to Indiana, because he knew she had always wanted to hold her company's first gala there and never had the budget for it. That was 5 years ago. A lot had changed since then, at least for Raymond. He smoothed the lapel of his custom navy suit, the one that had cost more than his first car, and allowed himself a small private smile. She would come. He was certain of it. The invitation had been sent through a mutual contact, a man named Bryce, who ran in both of their circles now. Though 5 years ago there had been no overlap, no circles, no Whitmore Grand Hotel. 5 years ago, Raymond had been a mid-level project manager at a logistics firm in Naperville with a credit score that made landlords nervous, and a business idea he had no idea how to execute. 5 years ago, Nadia Warren had been his girlfriend, and she had sat with him at the kitchen table of her apartment on South Cottage Grove every weekend for 8 months, helping him build what he could not build alone. He did not think about that much anymore. The ballroom was beginning to fill. The event was a technology leadership gala hosted by the Illinois Business Innovation Council and Raymond's company, the logistics automation platform he had launched 4 years ago using the framework that Nadia had helped him design, was this year's presenting sponsor. His name was on the program. His face was on the banner near the entrance. He had arrived. He took one last look in the mirror and walked out to claim the evening. What Raymond did not know, because he had not thought to ask and had not kept up with the news the way he once had, was that Nadia Warren had been on the cover of Crane's Chicago Business 14 months ago. He did not know that she had been a keynote speaker at MIT's Media Lab symposium the previous spring, or that her firm, Coreline Analytics, had closed a Series B round of $47 million in January and was already in talks for a Series C. He did not know any of this because after he left, after he took the pitch deck they had built together and filed the LLC without her name on it and stopped returning her calls. He had made it a habit not to look back. He had told people that the relationship had run its course. He had told his mother that they had grown in different directions. He had told Bryce, over drinks at a rooftop bar 2 years later, that Nadia had been a good person, but not someone who understood the pace he was operating at. Bryce had nodded and said nothing. Bryce had also, without telling Raymond, remained close with Nadia. It was Bryce who had delivered the invitation, and Bryce who had told Nadia, quietly, that Raymond had specifically requested her seating placement to be behind the east pillar. Nadia had looked at the invitation for a long moment. Then she had set it on the kitchen island of her home in Lincoln Park and said, simply, book a table, front section, make sure it's visible from the stage. Bryce had allowed himself a small smile of his own. Nadia Warren had grown up in Englewood, in a house with aluminum foil over the bedroom windows, because her mother couldn't afford blackout curtains and worked a night shift at a meatpacking facility on the south side. The foil had bothered Nadia when she was young. The other kids didn't have foil on their windows. And then she had stopped being bothered by it, because there were more important things to spend her attention on, like the library on 63rd Street that had computers available until 8 o'clock on weeknights, and a librarian named Mrs. Tatum who had noticed that Nadia was there every single evening and had started setting aside books she thought the girl might like. She had gotten a scholarship to the University of Illinois. She had worked 2 jobs to cover what the scholarship didn't. She had graduated with a degree in computer science and a minor in business analytics and gone directly into a consulting role at a firm in the Loop, where she had learned, over 6 years, how to look at a system, any system, a supply chain, a data architecture, a human organization, and see exactly where the inefficiencies lived and what it would take to fix them. That was the skill she had brought to Raymond's kitchen table. She had not thought of it as giving something away at the time. She had thought of it as building something together. She had believed, with the particular certainty of someone who has survived enough to trust her own instincts, that Raymond was the kind of man who would remember where he came from and who had walked with him. She had been wrong about that. She had updated her assessment and moved on. In the 2 years after Raymond stopped calling, she had done what she had always done. She had looked at the system, her own life, her own skills, the gap in the market she could already see clearly, and she had begun to build. Coreline Analytics started in her second bedroom with a laptop and one client, a regional hospital network that needed to understand why their discharge process was creating bottlenecks that cost them roughly $4 million a year. She fixed it in 11 weeks. The hospital's CFO referred her to 2 other clients before the year was out. By the end of year 2, she had 12 employees and a waiting list. By the end of year 4, she had the cover of Cranes and an offer from a firm in San Francisco that she had declined because she was not finished building what she was building in Chicago. She wore to the Whitmore Grand Hotel Gala a structured ivory blazer over wide-leg black trousers, small gold earrings that had belonged to her mother, and the particular expression of a woman who has nothing to prove and has chosen to be here anyway. Her team occupied a round table in the front section, directly sightline from the main stage, 8 people including her COO, her head of partnerships, and her general counsel. They had a full table setting, their name card printed on cream stock, Coreline Analytics, Innovation Table Sponsor. Nadia had sponsored the table 2 weeks ago when Bryce told her about the seating arrangement behind the pillar. Raymond saw her the moment he came off the elevator. He had not expected this. He had expected to see her from a distance, seated where he had placed her, small and peripheral, and forced to watch him accept the evening's Distinguished Innovator Award from across a crowded room. He had not expected her to be at a front table. He had not expected the ivory blazer, or the 8 people seated around her, or the table placard that he could read from where he was standing. He felt something shift in his chest that he did not immediately have a name for. His event coordinator, a young woman in a headset named Paige, appeared at his elbow. "Mr. Holt, they're ready for your welcome remarks whenever you are." "Give me a minute," Raymond said. He watched Nadia from across the room. She was talking to the woman on her right, her COO. Though Raymond didn't know this, and she was laughing at something. A genuine laugh that he recognized from years ago, the kind that reached her eyes. She had not looked in his direction. She did not appear to be aware of him, though he understood on some level that this was almost certainly a choice. A man Raymond didn't recognize leaned across the table to say something to Nadia, and she listened, nodded, and gestured toward the stage in a way that suggested she was already familiar with the evening's program. Not as a guest. As someone who had prepared, Raymond's jaw tightened. He straightened his cuffs and walked toward the stage. His welcome remarks were polished. He had practiced them. He talked about disruption and vision, and the city of Chicago as a place that rewarded bold thinking. He made a joke about his early days that got a good laugh, a joke that referenced a studio apartment and a dream, without mentioning anyone else in the apartment or anyone else who had contributed to the dream. People applauded. He smiled and stepped back from the podium, feeling like himself again. The dinner service began. Raymond moved through the room, doing what he was good at, working the space, shaking hands, accepting congratulations on the sponsorship and the company's recent growth. He was aware, with a low-frequency attentiveness he couldn't quite suppress, of exactly where Nadia was in the room at every moment. She did not approach him. He told himself this was fine. He had not expected her to approach him. He had expected her to sit in the back and feel what he had wanted her to feel. That plan had gone sideways before dinner was served, and he was still recalibrating. Around the salad course, he overheard the table next to Nadia's. A group of venture partners and 2 city aldermen erupt in what sounded like genuinely impressed conversation. He caught fragments. Series B, 47 million. What they did for the Mercy Health System. Department of Transportation contract. One of the aldermen leaned across the aisle toward Nadia's table and said something directly to her, and Nadia responded with a calm, unhurried answer that made the alderman nod twice and hand her his card. Raymond picked up his water glass and took a long sip. At the table to his left, one of the event's co-sponsors, a white-haired man named Fletcher, who ran a private equity firm on Michigan Avenue, tapped Raymond on the arm. "You know Coreline? The analytics firm at table 4? "I know the founder," Raymond said. Fletcher's eyebrows went up appreciatively. "Remarkable company. We looked at getting into their Series B, but it was oversubscribed inside of a week. You know what they did for the City Transit Authority? Saved them something like $9 million in operational costs in the first year." He shook his head. "That woman knows how to see a problem." "Yes," Raymond said. "She does." Fletcher moved on. Raymond set down his water glass with more precision than the moment required. The Distinguished Innovator Award was presented after the main course, and Raymond walked to the stage to receive it with the full weight of the room's attention on him, which was what he had wanted and had planned for. The award was a heavy glass plaque, etched with the council's logo and his name. He shook the presenting board member's hand and turned to face the room. He could see Nadia clearly from the stage. She was applauding with everyone else, neither more nor less, her expression composed and unreadable. She met his eyes for exactly one moment, not a glare, not a smile, simply a look that registered his presence and moved on. And Raymond felt, for the first time all evening, something he could not dress up as anything other than what it was. He gave his acceptance remarks. He thanked the council. He thanked his team. He said the word innovation 4 times and the word vision 3 times, and did not say the word partnership even once in the way that would have required him to name someone he had erased. When he returned to his seat, the applause was warm and appropriate and meant nothing. What happened next was not something Raymond had planned for, which was becoming a pattern in an evening he had spent months planning. The council's executive director, a woman named Patricia, who wore small round glasses and ran the organization with the organized efficiency of someone who had been doing it for 20 years, returned to the podium for the closing segment of the program. She announced a new initiative. The council was launching a Community Technology Access Fellowship designed to bring analytics tools and training to under-resourced neighborhoods across the Chicago metropolitan area. "We are proud," Patricia said, "to announce that the inaugural lead partner for this fellowship is Coreline Analytics, whose founder has committed not only significant funding, but also direct mentorship hours from her senior team." The room applauded. Many of you know the work Coreline has been doing. Fewer of you may know that the firm's founder grew up in Englewood, attended Chicago public schools, and built this company starting with a single client and a secondhand laptop. We think there is no better partner for a fellowship designed to show young people in this city what is possible. The applause was louder this time, genuine. The kind that comes when a room recognizes something true. Nadia stood briefly to acknowledge it. Not a full stand, just a partial rise, a small graceful acknowledgement, and then sat back down. Raymond stared at the glass plaque in front of him. The man to his left, Fletcher, leaned over again. "I had no idea she was from Englewood. You said you knew her. From when?" "A few years ago," Raymond said. "Before or after she started Coreline?" Raymond was quiet for a moment. "Before." Fletcher nodded slowly, in the way of a man who had heard a lot of stories about a lot of people over a long career and had learned to read the silences between the words. He said nothing more. He returned to his dessert. Raymond found Bryce near the bar during the networking portion of the closing hour. "You knew," Raymond said. It was not a question. Bryce turned to look at him with the steady, unhurried expression of a man who had decided, some time ago, that certain conversations were going to happen when they happened, and there was no use in either rushing or avoiding them. "I knew some of it. She's at a front table. She sponsored it. You knew she was going to." "Raymond." Bryce set down his glass. "What exactly did you think was going to happen tonight? What was the plan?" Raymond didn't answer. You invited her here, Bryce said, not unkindly but without softening the point. You put her behind the pillar. You wanted her to watch you receive an award for work that she had. He stopped. For work. I built the company, Raymond said. You built the company, Bryce agreed. Nobody took that from you. But you also know what you walked away from, and you know that the pitch framework and the market segmentation model were. That's not what tonight was about. I know what tonight was about. Bryce picked up his glass again. That's why I told her about the pillar. Raymond stood with that for a moment. The bar noise moved around them, glasses and conversation, and the particular hum of 100 people who had eaten a good meal and were feeling generous about the world. She didn't say anything to me, Raymond said. All night? No, Bryce said. She didn't, he paused. She's not even angry. No, Bryce said again. She's not. Raymond looked across the room to where Nadia was standing, with the alderman and two other people he recognized as tech investors, all of them leaning toward her with the body language of people who are listening carefully because what she is saying is worth hearing. He thought about the kitchen table on South Cottage Grove. He thought about the yellow legal pad she had used to map out the first version of the segmentation model, the pen moving quickly, her handwriting compact and precise. He thought about the night she had stayed up until 2 in the morning, helping him prep for a pitch that he had, ultimately, taken in a slightly different direction. A direction that had not included her. He had told himself, at the time, that the idea had evolved, that the direction had changed organically, that there was nothing to account for because there had been no formal agreement. He understood, standing at the bar of the Whitmore Grand Hotel, holding a glass award he had just received, that the accounting had happened anyway. It had just happened in the form of who each of them was standing here tonight and what each of them had built and what each of them had not. Nadia ended the evening where she intended to end it, at the door of the Whitmore's elevator bank, her coat over her arm, her COO beside her, two of her team members a few steps behind. She had shaken 32 hands, she estimated. She had exchanged cards with 11 people. She had agreed to 2 follow-up calls and 1 lunch. She had done, in other words, exactly what she had come to do. She did not look back toward the bar where she knew Raymond was still standing. She had no interest in a scene, no interest in a confrontation, no interest in giving him the satisfaction of knowing she had thought about this evening more than briefly. She had thought about it, of course. She was honest enough with herself to admit that. She had thought about the kitchen table and the yellow legal pad and the 8 months she had spent helping someone build something she had believed in, because she had believed in him. She had spent some time being angry about it. That time had passed. What she had now was a company that $47 million had evaluated at a number that would have been incomprehensible to the woman sitting at that kitchen table, and a fellowship that was going to put resources into the hands of kids in Englewood who had grown up the way she had grown up, with aluminum foil on the windows and a library on 63rd Street, and the quiet, persistent understanding that the world did not owe you anything, but that with the right tools you could build something the world would eventually come looking for. She pressed the elevator button. Her COO, a calm, perceptive man named Terrell, who had been with her since year 2, said, "Good night." "Good night," Nadia said, and she meant it. Raymond left the Whitmore at 10:45, the glass plaque tucked under his arm. He had stayed for the full networking hour, and then some, talking to people, collecting cards, performing the version of himself that the evening had been designed around. He had been very good at it. He was, in many ways, genuinely good at this, at the room, at the conversation, at the forward-facing architecture of impression and connection. These were real skills. He had built real things with them. He walked to the valet stand and stood in the November air and waited for his car. He thought about a phrase Nadia had used once, years ago, when they were talking about companies that fell apart after initial success. She had said, "The ones that don't last are the ones that forget which problems they actually solved and start believing the story they told about how they solved them." She had said it about a company, not about a person, but the way she said it had made him understand she was talking about something larger. He had thought, at the time, that she was being abstract. He understood now that she had been being precise. His car arrived. He got in. The city spread out around him as he pulled onto Michigan Avenue, all lights and cold air and the long, indifferent grid of a place that had seen 1,000 iterations of this particular story and would see 1,000 more. He drove south. He did not know what Nadia Osei Warren was doing at that moment, which was the same thing she had been doing for the past 4 years. Building the next thing, quietly and without waiting, in the way of someone who learned a long time ago that the only table that matters is the one you set for yourself.